The Indigent and the Indignant: Case Studies of the Salem Witch Trials. By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. The second witch of William Shakespeare's Macbeth prophesies as the trio of weird sisters add a succession of unappealing ingredients to their magical brew. Rattling the eye of newt and toe of frog, the hero's voice thunders through the cavern. How now, you secret black and midnight hags, what is it you do? A deed without name, they chime in return. These are the village witches, the wayward crones lurking just outside polite society, casting spells while they eschew acceptable behavior and traditional values. The Stuart king James I made the hunting of them a national hobby, but witches and black magic have been around since long before Shakespeare's time. Going back through history, nearly every global culture has contained some trace of these performers of the occult, whether through European maleficence and Near East mysticism, or indigenous shamanism and Creole voodoo. Witches have worked their brand of mischief throughout the ages. The legacy of witchcraft is an enduring one, and the image we have of the cackling harridan riding a broom with her cat familiar is one handed down from Puritan times. However, there were other societal archetypes stricken by the same judgment and disdain, most notably the poor and the rebellious. During Salem, Massachusetts's infamous witch trials, village magistrates cast their gaze on those in the community who acted outside prescribed cultural dictates. While a few men were caught up in the proceedings, most of the accused were women, considered undesirable by Puritan standards. The three women featured here were outcasts in one way or another and served to represent the sort of citizens likely to have found themselves under investigation for witchcraft. The trials commenced with the testimony of Tituba, a slave in the household of Reverend Paris, father and uncle of the two prime accusers. Next to be brought in, the destitute Sarah Good, who is seen as a burden on society. Bridget Bishop escaped previous charges of witchcraft, likely brought about from an untamed tongue, only to find herself under suspicion again. These women can be seen as the weird sisters of Salem. It is difficult to pinpoint what caused the hysteria that overtook this New England village in 1692. It was likely an intersection of several socio-political issues that turned neighbors against neighbor. A careful examination of the trial record sheds light upon the targets swept up in the frenzy. These documents reveal the witch trials began as an outlet for colonists to express their fear of indigenous spiritual practices and evolved into justification for the removal of citizens considered public nuisances. The trials serve as the perfect snapshot of a moment in time where fear, stricture, and law coalesced to create a perilous atmosphere for community outsiders. In the past, historians have painted the witch hysteria of Salem as the birthing pains of an infantile democracy, or the clashing of gendered expectations. They often read the events in Salem backwards, because the delineations between matters spiritual and temporal, the natural and the supernatural, are more pointedly marked now than they were 4 centuries ago. Most have framed their inquiries under the assumption the accusers knew their claims were irrational. Historian David Hall disagrees. He argues that while an individual may have set out to lie, and it is entirely likely and probable some did, witchcraft and magic were viewed as both real and logical during the 17th century. The stories may ultimately have been fictitious, but they were rooted in the reality of the period. It is unlikely a mysterious man appeared to Tituba and forced her into a pact with the devil. However, it is possible that Tituba, primed by her familiarity with indigenous occultism and Puritan superstition, interpreted a particularly vivid dream as an authentic nocturnal visit from Satan. Such was the Puritan emphasis on spiritual manifestation. The psychological roots of the trial have been explored in John Demos's book Entertaining Satan and Mary Beth Norton's In the Devil's Snare. Demos asserts one accuser suffered from regression due to psychological trauma, while another was taken ill with menopause. He explains the causes outside of these two afflictions varied, but with each one came from an expression of rage and fear. Norton refers to the trials as a crisis of a particular time and place. She argues King William's War led to a fearfully charged atmosphere within Salem and the surrounding villages, fomenting distress and hysteria. The case studies of Tiba, Sarah Good, and Beryl Bishop expand upon these themes. A servant belonging to Reverend Paris was the first witness brought in. Over time, the image of Tituba has been conflated to resemble showbiz psychic Miss Cleo, a convivial voodoo occultist from the Caribbean. However, she was consistently referred to throughout the records as an Indian woman. Historian Elaine Bresla contends both were likely true. In Tituba's confession, she asserts Tituba was an Arawak, bought by the Paris family when they lived in Barbados. Tituba's origins have caused debate, and there is nothing in the trial records to suggest where she may have lived prior to Salem. However, the historical identification of her indigenous heritage explains why the magistrates deemed her testimony legitimate. In Wonders of the Invisible World, Cotton Mather described New England as the Devil's Territories. The first of his curiosities is contained in a conversation with the Reverend John Higginson. Higginson informed him of the indigenous tribes settled around Mexico had been sent there on a mission from Satan, in a reversal of what God gave the tribes of Israel. This idea the uncharted territories of America were owned by the devil and populated by demonic tribes was very pervasive at the time. Heightened by the destruction caused during King William's War, the Puritans feared both the brutality of the natives and their strange spiritual ways. In this atmosphere, Tituba's tales of spectral torture and unhinged devilry made the magistrates sit up and take notice. Through 5 days of testimony, Tituba's story remained consistent and grounded in Arawak lore. She named 2 women accused of torturing Betty Paris and her friends, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, telling the court they instructed her to hurt the children, but she refused. The women were then joined by a tall man who told Tituba if she did not hurt the children, they would do worse to her. Then the black dog told her the same. The dog transformed into a man with a yellow bird. He told her he would give her pretty things if she served him. From here, the story continues its journey through the fantastical. Tituba regaled the magistrates with tales of traveling via broom, Sarah Good's yellow bird sucking sustenance betwixt her fingers, and an unknown demon with a head like a woman and wings. Throughout the examination, there are indications Tituba may have been in a trance. While in this state, she claimed to be with the accused as they were tormenting the victims, and eventually claimed to go blind. Tituba's trance is the most obvious connection to Arawak dogma, which calls for shamanic hypnosis during the uncovering of a spirit. However, references to Arawak spiritual traditions can be found throughout Tituba's testimony, which is filled with malevolent shapeshifters like the Duppy, a ghostly specter found in West Indian folklore, and other religious rituals. In accordance with Arawak culture, Tituba believed the evil invading Salem resided within the accused and required no intermediary with the devil. This fact alone frightened the Puritans, after all they had seen during the wars with the native inhabitants of their new home. Puritan anxiety grew with the oft-repeated rumors of native cannibalism and devil worship. Prior to the trials, the English world thought of America's native inhabitants as wild and savage. Their refined Christian doctrine categorized the raw, unnatural indigenous ways as fiendish devilry ruled over by Satan himself. A 1624 tract written by Edward Winslow, leader at Plymouth Colony, details gruesome rituals, frenzied dancing, cross-species transmutation, murder, and cannibalism. Logic and reason, combined with a deeper understanding of indigenous culture, provides a much clearer comprehension of Native spirituality and shamanism today. At the time, the Puritans had only their own framework of God and the devil to rely upon. A decade after Winslow, William Wood scandalized Puritan audiences with an eyewitness account of a diabolical worship during a powwow. He said the Sachem's shaman, Passaconaway, could make the water burn, the rocks move, the trees dance, and metamorph himself into a flaming man. The belief that indigenous worship was rooted in Satanism was so prevalent among Puritans, even the native-friendly colonists who lived among them and advocated their rights believed it. Tituba's recounting of events fit within the framework of Puritan perceptions of Native Americans, justifying their mounting fears the devil had come to Salem. Whether or not she believed the tale, Tituba cast herself alongside the victims, insisting she was more likely to be bewitched than a witch. She claimed a thing like an Indian, all black, which did pinch her in the neck and pulled her by the back part of her head to the door of the house. She reasoned this may have been a dream, but could not say for sure. This assertion is seemingly contradicted by the testimony of Ann Putnam Jr., who goes on to affirm Tituba stopped pricking and pinching me most dreadfully upon confession. Elizabeth Hubbard gave the same story, adding the torture went further, and Tituba's specter attempted to choke her. For all Tituba's claims to the contrary, she is the only one of the accused for which there is proof of sorcery. The reference to Mary Sibley's role in the act can be found in a March 1692 notation in the Salem Village Church records. A close neighbor of the Paris family, Sibley was arguably the true instigator. Upon witnessing the dreadful fits of the two girls in the Paris household, she instructed Tituba to concoct a witch cake to find the perpetrator. Why she did this, or where she may have learned the practice, is unclear. However, the notation in the church book indicates she was swiftly forgiven, despite the Reverend labeling her actions diabolical. Sister Sibley had raised the devil amongst them, out of nothing more than ignorance. Mary Sibley evaded punishment as a member of the Brethren in good standing, most pious and devout. Those on the outs with the church or Salem society, the indigent and the indignant, did not fare so well. What began as a forum to express Puritan fear over the tribes of the devil quickly devolved into neighborly finger-pointing, spurred on by Salem's divisive reverend. Samuel Parris's daughter and niece commenced their fits in the days after the reverend warned his congregation the devil was at work in Salem. His sermons during this time emphasized the disparities between those who belonged to the church and those who did not. In this pressurized environment, the brethren felt empowered to punish the exiles. The trial records do not confirm names were fed to the magistrates, but there are clues it occurred. On several occasions, the victims admitted they did not know the person they accused. Many times, court was the first time the victim saw them in person. Parris testified on behalf of himself and the victims, in addition to serving as the court reporter. In this way, he wielded full control over the evidence, providing, explaining, and recording it. As the testimony of many shows, the most reliable way to escape accusations was to lodge their own. Tituba was the first to practice this strategy, giving up Sarah Good's names to the magistrates. Testimony shows that Sarah Good often found herself on the wrong side of Salem's citizens. Saddled with debt from her first marriage, Good and her husband shifted from house to house, looking for charity and leaving chaos in their wake. One of the first to be interrogated, Good told the magistrates she scorned whomever was afflicting the victims. Despite her protestations, they continued to badger her. Why did she torment the victims? Who did she employ to do so? And why did she mutter when leaving other people's houses? If I must tell, I will tell, she retorted, angry her denials were ignored. Good's continued antagonisms caused the magistrates to label her wicked and spiteful. Even her husband stood in opposition. "You must be a witch," he accused, owing to her bad carriage towards him. He tearfully called her an enemy to all good. Accusations of transfiguration, spectral torment, and stalking flowed from the witness stand. In addition to pricking, pinching, and kicking, further testimony painted a worse picture. Sarah Vibber claimed Good not only pressed and choked her, but also caused fits in her child, who cried and twisted so dreadfully. This is not the only charge of violence against children. Joanna Childon alleged the spirit of her deceased child appeared with the specter of Good in tow. She was to blame for his death. Reports of Good's violence grew. Testimony from outside the original circle of victims exposed the truth behind the allegations. The good people of Salem believed Sarah Good was a burden on society. Goody Gage spoke of Good's appearance on her doorstep 2 years prior begging for charity, only to be turned away due to suspicions she had been near the smallpox. Gage remembered hearing Good mutter as she walked away. The next morning, their cows began to die. Samuel and Mary Abbey were then called to the bar. 3 years before, they had housed the destitute Goods. Sarah had been so turbulent and spiteful, the Abbeys had turned them out. Ever since, there had been strange cattle deaths. Henry Herrick related a similar story. The destitute Goods were unwelcome visitors. Where Sarah Good committed the crime of poverty, Bridget Bishop's strident personality threatened established social order. Unlike her demure peers, Bishop was not quiet, pious, or compliant. She had a history of disobedience that began during her abusive first marriage. As a result, the charges of witchcraft were nothing new. Bishop began her testimony with deference, answering each question in a calm, clear manner. The atmosphere took a turn when she dared give a response the magistrates perceived as a threat. "If I were a witch, you would know it," she told them. Soon after, a supposed former lover was called to the bar. William Stacy spun a tale of love gone awry. 14 years previously, Bishop had approached Stacy while he was ill with smallpox. Professing great love for the man, she hired him to assist with some work. She paid him, but when he checked his pocket for the coins, they were missing. Later, they ran into each other again. This time, Bishop asked if Stacy's father would be willing to grind her grist. When Stacy questioned why his father would balk at such a request, Bishop answered that folks counted her a witch. From there on, he alleged, Bishop ceaselessly tormented him, both physically and spectrally. The man detailed these ongoing pranks, saving the worst for last. The blow was unexpected, but chilling. Stacy blamed Bishop for the death of his once thriving infant, Priscilla. Stacy's bombshell opened the door for more allegations of infanticide, with neighbor John Louder adding to the chorus. Further investigation revealed the two were involved in various spats over the previous decade. John Bly and his son told the court they found several puppets made of rags with pins in them hidden in Bishop's walls when they remodeled her cellar. This revelation also uncovered quarrels between the families over Bly's inability to pay for a pig he bought from the Bishops. Another local family, the Shaddocks, appear to have been taken advantage of by a fraudulent witch-finder, a stranger who saw an opportunity to swindle the struggling parents when he caught sight of their disabled child. For a small fee, he promised to get rid of the nuisance customer who had bewitched their children on account of his wife's pride. Bishop's physical response to the witchfinder's haranguing only further cemented her as a menace. The evidence was too much to overcome, and Bishop was the first to hang on Gallows Hill. By the time the trials concluded, 25 people had lost their lives, most of whom were guilty of nothing more than poverty or a sharp tongue. The embers of post-war trauma and simmering congregational tensions grew to a conflagration with the addition of Tituba's compelling and frightful testimony. Alarmed by what they saw as proof of Satan's influence, neighbor turned on neighbor. Petty sins such as cursing on the Sabbath or begging for charity became execution-worthy crimes. The vulnerable and the marginalized, like Sarah Good and Bridget Bishop, found themselves at the mercy of a community blinded by fear and superstition. Instead of fighting the devil, Salem waged a war of public retribution, using the trials as an opportunity to rid themselves of problematic citizens. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation.